Well, today we are tempted to puff up our egos and claim the high ground by arriving here while others do not brave the cold. But we might do well just to give thanks that we are safe and well and wish our fellow churchgoers the best. The storm kind of reminds me of this old joke, and I'm not in the habit of telling jokes per se, but it reminds me of this joke about this farmer in New England who, despite a great blizzard, 4 or 5 feet of snow came into his town. He goes to church on Sunday morning, and the door opens, and there the minister is there to greet him, and the farmer goes in and takes his seat, and the minister mounts the high pulpit, and the farmer looks around, and he's the only one in the church. So the minister does the greetings, passes the peace, reads the prayers, does the communion, sings all the hymns a cappella, gives this 25-minute sermon, sings the postlude, gives the benediction, and walks to the back. The farmer shuffles out toward the back, shakes the man's hand, and says, "You know, I feed the cows every day. I put a whole load of hay out for them. But when one comes, I don't give them the whole load." You know? So, I was tempted to give you the whole load, but I've been good, and I think I've trimmed this sermon down a little bit. My intent is to preach about the church and the foundations of the church, especially in the Advent season. And I know that preaching about the church to you on a day like this is kind of like giving the whole load to that farmer who showed up. Because you are here, willing participants in this thing we call church. You need little convincing that what you get here, what we do here, is important. Well, we have entered into Advent. We are in the shopping season. The countdown of Christmas blast-off is upon us. We receive from the church unique and precious gifts. And I want to point to them briefly. Those things are time, perspective, and a glimpse of the divine with a dash of responsibility tossed in. So let me talk about these things. Friday, when I woke up to the ice storm apocalypse, to the sound of electrical transformers blowing up in my neighborhood, what followed was my emergency preparedness improvisation. I got out the camping gear and started to cook the most essential of things, the tea and the coffee, on the Whisper Light stove. My 9-year-old came into the kitchen, and after he got over his intrigue that I was trying not to burn the house down with a flaming camp stove, he realized that there was no power. And when he realized there was no power, he realized there was no TV. And when he realized there was no TV, he realized there were no video games. To boot, the iPad was dying. Cries of "what will we do" erupted as the thick ooze of time, never before experienced in such dramatic ways, arrived in our home. Nothing to do was the response. But what I realized was that there was much to do. And on top of that, there was so much time to do it in. Didn't you feel that? Nowhere to go, no electrical distractions. The pace of time was slowed to its natural course. Deliberate. I'm reading a small book, which I recommend to you, by Jacob Needleman, called Time and the Soul, in which he says the modern dilemma is not a problem of time, but time poverty. That we, awash in material goods and forms of money that allow us to pretty much do anything we want in any time, faster technology that connects us beyond the small corners of our lives, we realize that we are no longer living our lives, but that our lives are living us. Because we have lost a sense of the mystery of time that calls us back to ourselves, to our freedom, to our humanness. Our lives are filled with time agitation. Now, I would be lying to tell you that I missed that agitation this weekend. I have grown so accustomed to it that the quiet, slow movement of the day was at first quite agitating. I like the way the television makes the morning go by quickly. Rather, what I had was hours with a friend who took us in just to make food and talk and plan. The day seemed slow and somewhat uncomfortable until I eased into it. Nothing to do, nowhere to go. I am hoping that that good feeling of those who have eased into the time is why there are so few here today and not just the ice. Needleman says that the great tragedy of our lives is that the presence of humanness depends on people who can be in the moment. And that is where the church comes in. One foundation of the church, especially this month, with all its distractions and all its urgings. Even when Mother Nature isn't doing it for us, the church is here to slow things down, to put a marker in the week, to honor our presence together and our togetherness, the togetherness of our presence. Here we search for what is good and meaningful. And that means we must put away distractions and plant ourselves in the moment for the good of us all. So when there is no ice, there is the church to help us mark a moment in time. And those of you who have been coming for years and years and years understand that even more than I might. On to perspective. As part of our practice of time also comes another foundation of the church, and that is perspective. The church helps us create a perspective, and that, to me, most essentially, is that we are seeking a both-and perspective in an either-or world. I don't have to tell you about the either-or paradigm that we live in. You have your own stories, where there are some who are right and some who are wrong, and some who have and some who don't, and some are good and some are not, and some are saved and some are damned. I realize that our Unitarian and Universalist trajectories have prepared us for this moment where we become a church that promotes a both-and perspective in an either-or world. This is true especially in politics, and as it is in spirituality. We are called to point to the goodness of love while others bicker over God's preferences for gay or straight folks. We are to point to justice while others point to political parties. And living in that both-and perspective is not easy. We forget to practice it. But that is what we are here to do. And we are not alone. The core of the Christian message is fully coming from that both-and perspective. A Christian preacher told me a story recently about a woman who wanted to baptize her daughter in the church. It was a rural community, and she bore this child out of wedlock, which apparently is still an important marker in some rural communities, and that marker pushing her aside. And so she came to the minister, and he agreed to baptize the child, but he didn't realize the awkwardness of the moment when he got to the place in the ceremony when he says, "Who stands with this child to assure the commitments of the baptism? Who stands with this child?" And there were no godparents to answer the question because no one in the rural community would agree to be that person. And so a both-and thing happened. Without a hesitation, the whole congregation stood up and with one voice said, "We will." That kind of both-and action comes from a core message of love for all, that the first shall be last and the last shall be first, and that all God's creatures are worthy. A message that seems to have been forgotten in some places. But we are here in part to work toward that both-and spirituality, especially at this time of year. I hear some of you saying that Christmas is bunk and you will not do it. I say, do it anyway. The both-and perspective on Christmas says, it may be bunk, but it's all about an exercise in joy and peace and love. So why wouldn't we do it the whole way? Both-and perspectives are a foundation of the church. And lastly, to glimpse the divine, to seek the divine, as Aaron spoke of last week. Although a colleague of mine says, I don't know why anyone would want to see God because things generally go terribly wrong when you do. But I say the foundation, the work, is to desire to be known by God, to be recognized, the desire to be of use and to desire rightly. That is what we are after. We are not here to convince you that God will save or heal you. We are here to ask you to combat your emptiness, to know that you are loved, to be connected to a God beyond God. We are here to learn that we are worthy of all life's gifts and to imbue the Spirit with a thirst for wisdom and kindness and peace. One attendee at the Inquirer's class last week said that he tries to live every day like it's Christmas, giving kindly and joyfully welcoming guests into his life, and I think he's on to something. And so it is our responsibility as part of this church to practice like it is Christmas, to expect and to hope and to behave toward each other and the world as if we expect the birth of love and joy and peace. And if we do, I believe that spiritual presence will follow us into our lives. Rita Snowden, an author, told a story once of being in a town outside of Dover, England. She was sitting in a cafe, and unbelievably, she sensed this amazing scent that came over her, this pleasant, beautiful scent. So she asked the waiter, what is going on here? What is this scent? And he said, it's the people walking by. They work in a perfume factory. And she said, what a metaphor for spiritual life. That we too can carry the scent of a deep and abiding spiritual life into the world. And that spiritual life is made up of understanding the presence of time in our lives, working toward both and perspectives, and seeking to be known by the divine and desiring rightly the things in our lives. That is the work of the church. It is why we organize. It is why we hold parish meetings that you should attend. It is why the root of the word church, ecclesia, means called out. Because the first disciples in the church were called out to see the marvel of the holy move across the grayness of things, the grayness of their lives, the grayness of our lives, and to answer the call. To know time and our poverty in it, to practice perspectives that open us to others, to seek the divine, especially in this time of year, with all its agitation, with all its things to do, with all its urgings and desires. That is the work of the people of the church. That is what begs us to fill ourselves with meaning rather than the distractions of the season. That is what I believe is true today. So I've spared you the whole load, but hopefully enough nourishment for the week and the season to come. So I say, on this day, amen.